in his first sit-down interview since the election, and he didn't stop at eliminating birthright citizenship.
Let me ask you about another group of people, the estimated 4 million families in America who have mixed immigration status. So I'm talking about parents who might be here illegally, but the kids are here legally. Your borders are
You're talking about separation?
Yeah, well, I mean, there are two aspects to this. Your borders are, Tom Homan said, they can be deported together.
Correct.
Is that the plan?
Well, that way you keep well, I don't want to be breaking up families, so the only way you don't break up the family is you keep them together, and you have to send them all back.
Even kids who are here legally?
Well, what you're going to do if they want to stay with the father? Look, we have to have rules and regulations. You can always find something out like, this doesn't work, that doesn't work.
You can always find some line in the Constitution it breaks. So the grand plan of deporting the 11 million people here in the country illegally now also means, according to Donald Trump, illegally deporting U.S. citizens as well. Aaron Blake writes this in the Washington Post, quote, "The options for the administration are relatively simple. Either you somehow deport U.S. citizens too, or you separate these families by sending the parents to another country. Either option is obviously fraught. It's not at all clear how the former would pass legal muster. As for the latter, while polls have shown the American people lean in favor of the broad concept of mass deportation, a recent survey showed they opposed it 57% to 38% if it leads to the separation of families." Stephen Miller, who Trump chose to be his deputy chief of staff for policy at the White House and who was an architect of the cruel family separation policy during Trump's first term, echoed the urgency that Trump is expressing. Here he is yesterday on Fox News.
John Thune and Lindsey Graham have promised that they can get a full funding package for the border, the most significant border security investment in American history, which would be the biggest domestic policy win in at least 50 years, to the president's desk in January or early February. That would mean a massive increase in ICE officers working on the deportation operation that Tom Homan just laid out. That would mean a historic increase in border agents, a pay raise for both, full funding for military operations, full funding for ICE beds, full funding for air and marine operations, full funding for all of the barriers and technology that you need to ensure there's never another Godaway entering this country. Now, President Trump, regardless, on day one is going to issue a series of executive orders that seal the border shut and begin the largest deportation operation in American history.
It's where we start the hour with some of our favorite experts and friends. Deputy Director of the ACLU's Immigrants' Rights Project, Lee Gallant, is back with us here at the table. Distinguished political scholar and professor at Princeton University, Eddie Gallant is here. Also joining us, former Undersecretary of State for Public Diplomacy and Public Affairs during the Obama administration, Rick Stengel's here, and former RNC spokesman, now host of the Bulwark podcast, MSNBC political analyst Tim Miller is here. Lee, I start with you. This is the third time we've had a chance to talk since the election. I pinned you down with an aggressive line of follow-up questions, but you told me you were optimistic after the election. After hearing this interview with Kristen Welker, do you remain optimistic?
I'm sorry, I'm not hearing you, Nicolle.
Oh, let's fix your audio. We'll make sure that we get your audio back up. Tim, I've had a chance to interview Lee a couple of times, and I think the muscle memory for sort of turning to the courts and the public to draw some lines in the sand. Obviously, the country voted over. There's some things that Trump ran on that you could say, well, the country didn't know they were getting Kash Patel. I don't know. Most people didn't see. I would argue that Kash Patel was pretty front and center, but immigration isn't one of them. Trump talked about immigration. He played videos about immigration. He talked about mass deportations. His supporters held printed signs that said mass deportations at the Republican convention. His base of support, which prevailed in the election, wants immigration to change. And it is possible that they don't want this, an end to birthright citizenship and the mass deportation of millions and millions of people, something the country's never experienced, never pulled off. Where do you think the real sort of tension is around this issue?
Yeah, look, I think that it's fair to look at Donald Trump and look at his first term and say he promised to build the wall. That was his core promise. Did he do it? Or did he build a few miles and hold some press conferences and send out some bleats and claim that it was the greatest wall ever, right? Like, might there be a mass deportation parallel like that? And I think the answer to that is maybe. You also look at the incoming administration, and if there's one area where he has a team that actually knows their way around the laws and the regulations and have studied this, it would be immigration. And Stephen Miller and Tom Homans and even Russ Vought, like, they're serious about this, so they know what they're doing. So I think that would be the case for, no, it's not going to be like the wall. They're really going to get what they say. And so I think it's worth having discussion and monitoring that and being honest with people about that. But like, the reality is, even in the first term, like, there were still horrible real world consequences to this. And I remember I was listening to or that little segment with Aaron Blake where they talked about, if you're going to deport, you're going to have to deport U.S. citizens, right? Like, as kind of as if that's a new thing. But U.S. citizens, like, were wrapped up in this the first time, right? During the Muslim ban, there were U.S. citizens that were detained in airport cells. I wrote a story during the first term about Francisco Galicia, who was a kid in Texas whose brother was undocumented. They both got rounded up. And Francisco, who was a U.S. citizen, was in a detention cell for 3 weeks before they figured out that he was a U.S. citizen. Because that's like the nature of these things, right? If you are going to empower a bunch of ICE agents and constitutional sheriffs to deport people, Trump is right about that. Some people are going to get rounded up that aren't meant to be. Maybe it's the wife of a guy that is illegal, or a kid. And so I just think that whether it's like the comedy of errors Trump or the nefarious Trump, like, there's going to be bad real world consequences either way.
I mean, Lee, if you're back with us, what would you even do as an American president with American citizens? Don't you have to pre-negotiate another country to give them citizenship before you hand over American citizens to, I mean, where is he sending American citizens, and what status would they have in the country to which they're deported?
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right, Nicolle. He cannot deport U.S. citizens. I think what they mean is they are going to make it so harsh that they're going to deport the parents of U.S. citizen children and then say to the parents, your choice is to either live without your children for the rest of their lives or to take your child to a country that they've never stepped foot in, even though they're a U.S. citizen child, because I cannot believe that even this administration thinks they can deport U.S. citizen children. You're absolutely right. There's just no way to do it. It's not allowed. It would be flatly illegal. We would be in court in a second. So I think what they're talking about is just being so inhumane and forcing separations on families. You know, the truth is, as we've discussed before, the immigration laws allow a lot of harshness. And the only reason that past presidents, Democratic or Republican, haven't really gone after families with small U.S. citizen children is because they've exercised, some sound discretion. And now we're hearing that maybe they're going to go after these families, and I don't doubt that they will, and force these kinds of separations on families. And to your points earlier, the American public heard about mass deportations in the abstract, but I think when they see it in practice, what it means, little U.S. citizen children being left behind from their parents, potentially the military in the streets, I think they're going to have a different reaction to it.
Lee, can you just, as someone who spends a lot of time thinking about this and preparing to help people, and I take Tim's point about the competence factor, because Infrastructure Week was also announced like every Wednesday or Thursday, and Monday would come around and there was never any Infrastructure Week. But let's this time take them at their word that this is something they're committed to doing. What does it look like? How do you move 11 million people around? Were they on planes, trains, buses? Where do you put them? Who cares for them? Who takes care of their health? And then where do they go?
Yeah, so I think both points you're hitting on are true. I think they're going to be more competent and more prepared this term. So we are ready for that. We are not assuming that it's just going to be a comedy of errors. We're assuming they're going to be much more prepared. But having said that, I don't think you can move millions and millions of people. I think that's why they're talking about getting the military involved. And so whether they can deport all 11 million people or just millions of people and break up families, either way, it's going to be extremely harsh. But the logistics are complicated, and I think that's why they're looking toward the military, which is really unfortunate that they're going to bring our military into something like this. And I assume that the military is not going to be happy about it, and we're going to see how they go about it. But the logistics are extremely complicated. And to your point, I think what's going to happen is people, including children, are going to be put into conditions that are really horrendous. And, we'll have to monitor that and challenge that as well.
Lee, when you see that some red state governors are building or designating space for what may be a holding center, we don't know exactly what the space is. Right. What sorts of things do you think people should not fail to imagine could be coming?
Oh, yeah. I think that people need to really understand that this is going to be horrendous. We're going to be ripping people out of communities. You know, the conditions are going to be horrendous. People are going to be sent to countries that maybe they've never stepped foot in. There's not going to be screenings for people who may be facing torture or persecution. And, you know, and one of the things we've talked about, Nicolle, is that when people hear about this, they think, well, this is not going to affect our family or anybody we know. But I can't tell you how many calls I've gotten, or especially during the first term of Trump, saying, well, I didn't know they were going to go after this person or that person, a custodian in my son's school. He's such a nice guy. But if we're really talking about mass deportations, that's what we're talking about. We're not just talking about hardened criminals and national security threats. We're talking about people who have been contributing to the economy, to society for a long time. And I think it's not just, you know, a moral issue. It's going to be an economic one as well if we're decimating whole industries.
I mean, Eddie, Lee just hit on the truest thing that you can say about not all Trump voters, but a lot of them. Quote, this isn't going to affect me. Mm-hmm. This isn't going to hurt me. Yeah. I'm not going to feel sad when I see this happen. I would, and again, let me say, country needs borders. President Obama deported more people than any president in American history. This has not been traditionally a right-left issue. I think some of the Obama folks sort of describe it as an issue of order. Like you have a border, it's enforced, you do what Lee said, you look at people as human beings and they're treated humanely. It's why no one before Trump contemplated the child separation policy, which was so bad, Trump actually reversed it in a signing at the Resolute desk. But the idea that this is who we are, it is another thing to rumble with.
Yeah, selfish indifference borders, in certain contexts, borders on a complicity with evil. A selfish indifference in certain contexts borders complicity with evil. But I was sitting here thinking, and Mark Twain's, something that's attributed to Mark Twain came to mind, that, you know, history doesn't repeat itself, but it damn sure rhymes. And I don't want us to move past his talk about birthright citizenship and the border, because the stuff around birthright citizenship shows us that the issue's not really the border.
Right.
It shows us that it's really not about that. So what does it mean that he's going after birthright citizenship? What does it mean that he's going after the 14th Amendment? What does it mean that he wants to overturn Wong Kim Ark, right? Which reinforced the 14th Amendment. What does he mean? What is he trying to do when he tries to undermine a notion of citizenship that came into view as a response to the 1857 Dred Scott decision? What is he trying to do when in 1790 the first Naturalization Act held that for white children birthright citizenship was good? It was explicit. So there is something happening here. The moment you introduce birthright citizenship, denaturalization, this is not about the crisis at the border. It's about great replacement. And what we have to do is to make that explicit so that we can understand that the Stephen Millers and the Tom Holmans, that they're not engaging in good faith. So some of us who want secure borders, we can see the reason